Welcome to the Big Success Podcast, cutting-edge conversations on business and personal success, as well as how to level up. Here's your host, #1 business coach in the world, Brad Sugars.
Dan, you're going to have fun on this week's episode. Dr. Brian Glibkowski, see, I even got his name right, Answer Intelligence. You know, one of the most amazing things is how he breaks down how you do answers and even the prep work to be able to be amazing at it. When you look at how he trained comedians, stand-up comedians, and the whole thing. But if you're in sales, this is massive. If you're in leadership, this is massive. If you're in coaching, this is massive. So many great takeaways from today's session. Dr. Brian Glibkowski, this is the book, Answer Intelligence. Of course, he's a PhD professor, all that stuff, authored all of the articles, but he teaches all around the world. Business school, top 20, top 22 business books, all that stuff. This is Dr. Brian. He's on the podcast with us today, helping you with your success. So, Brian, I have to ask, with all the studies you've done, what is your definition of success? Like, how do you define success?
Thanks, Brad. The Big Success Podcast. So it made my head spin a little bit. Am I thinking about success in terms of what it should be or how it is, how I live my life? And I sort of leaned into looking backwards, how I live my life and what success is. So I would define success as making oneself whole. So I think success is a transformation of failure into success. Let me give you a metaphor and then a brief story, and I'll turn it back to you. So, the metaphor is sort of like a full circle journey. So each of us in our professions and family life, we have certain things that are essential to us, like leadership or sales or family. In a full circle journey sense, what I'm talking about here is becoming whole, is starting at that beginning point with something really important, and then going around the circle, realizing there's something wrong and trying to go back to the beginning to understand it for the first time, to sort of a sense of wholeness. And that's what I'm talking about, what success is. And I could provide a brief story if you'd like, or I could turn it back to you now.
Oh, give me the story.
So here's the story. So my background's in and out of academia. And the first academic conference I went to was at Ohio State. It was a small conference. I was the only PhD student presenting a paper, and it was basically all senior professors. I'm a management professor by training. And all the professors went out to dinner, and we were sitting around a large table. It was like 3 or 4 tables combined. There were probably 40 people there. And the conversation shifted to the research that people do. And long story short, it was sort of consensus around the table that people tend to research things they're bad at. So you have a leading leadership scholar looking at leadership, negotiator looking at negotiations, and they can't negotiate. And I thought to myself right away, wow, there's so many things I don't do well. I'm going to do really great at research. But ultimately, I sort of focused on communication. And that was the thing I wanted to be whole at. I wanted to be a better communicator. And that sort of experience really stuck with me over the years.
So, yeah, I remember as a young man, someone said, yeah, you teach what you most need to learn. It's why people go into psychiatry or psychology. It's like they're the people with the most messed up things. But flip that over then and think back, where in your life did you choose to be successful, like choose to be above average or better than the normal, or go for the best Brian possible?
Yeah, I think, it dovetails with what I just talked about. But, for each of us, whether it's leadership or for me, communication, or for someone, family, I think we choose success because of our failures, and they're sort of thrust upon us. So for me in the classroom, when I was teaching, I could see the students weren't engaged and they didn't quite get the point I wanted to get. So these became nagging questions that stuck with me that I wanted answers to. Why are they not engaged? How could I teach them better? What is it they don't understand? And it was these unanswered questions that I was coming back to again and again. And it was through that process of sort of self-discovery, I became better. So that example is in the classroom, but I found this example elsewhere in my life. Like when I was doing consulting with companies, things weren't going right. And I was asking questions of myself. So this is, again, part of my larger, discovery process of becoming whole as a person.
So think about it then from this perspective. What is the difference from someone who actually learns from their failures and someone who becomes their failures? How do you see that difference?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think this makes me think about how intentional we are. Maybe when we're trying to, address our challenges, overcome our failures. My research, which we might get to a little bit, is on communication and questions and answers and how we do this effectively. And what I found is that people that don't communicate effectively are not intentional, they're not aware. And this reminds me of something that Pfeffer and Sutton said. They're organizational behavior professors at Stanford. They said people have, 25 years of experience, but really what this is 1 year of experience repeated 25 times.
Yeah.
Learning from what they've done wrong. So I think, for me, it was not just having scripts that I was talking about. Like when someone asked me about, leadership, and I would tell a story or relate to some theory or explain something, but I was really being intentional and self-aware about what I was saying and what was wrong. And I think that was a lesson I've learned with this communication research. And what the best communicators do is they're very intentional, they're very thoughtful, and they're very aware of what they're doing.
Yeah. So what then is your formula for success? Like how does success happen in business, life, communication, all areas? You must have over the years being successful said, oh, that's what makes me successful.
Yeah, I think, for me personally, and this is very specific to my, research on communication, is I wanted to understand, um, this process of communication. And I went on a journey where I started in academia and I did research and wrote a book and then went to marketing. We have partners in 17 countries that use our framework called Answer Intelligence. And as I was reflecting on this process, I think it's something that's generalizable to other things. And it really comes down to 3 steps for me. The first is self reflection. So I needed to take a look at myself in the classroom, what was going wrong. And for me, it was putting it into an academic paper, putting it into a book, being aware of what the issue was. And so that's self reflection, step one. And step two for me was involving others. So once I sort of had my grounding of what I wanted to do, started to involve others, and with my company then involved getting partners around the world that had similar interests to me. And even this podcast was part of this process, right? Involving others, involving you. And third, to me, is really about transformation. It's about when you have your compass of where you're going, you involve the right people, and then some magical things happen and dots get connected in ways you didn't think about, and others are connecting those dots for you. So that's why I think, going back to my definition of success, I said success is a transformation of a failure into a success. And that transformational process sort of takes you, from your starting point, but also as you're going through this journey, it's becoming something entirely different. Originally I was concerned about teaching in the classroom. Well, I'm not in the classroom anymore. I'm moving on to other things and doing other things, but this transformational process of becoming a better communicator is still there.
Do you think that transformation, that magic that happens when you involve other people, if you didn't have that self-reflective first and that question to answer sort of things, it's amazing. We're here talking about answer intelligence, or we're going to get onto that subject in a minute. Yeah. But it's really interesting to see that you have to start asking yourself the right questions and then other people the right questions. How does that fit in for your success formula, that ability to pick the right question?
Yeah, I think, this sort of goes back to research, my training in research. But again, we can generalize this to sales or leadership or company strategy, and I can do that briefly. As a researcher, wow, there's a cornucopia of things you could look at. But you have to focus and say, this is the kind of research I want to do. It's almost like it's your identity, your direction. And the same thing is true now for those that are listening that are focusing on sales or leadership or strategy for their company. It's about setting an internal compass and saying, this is where we're going. And I think it's really clear when people think of like strategy, for example, with like Michael Porter, he talks about you need to, have a strategy. If you don't have a specific strategy, you're sort of stuck in the middle. So I just think, it was important for me because this is my journey. I wanted to define what my journey was going to be about, all this communication and these answers and all this stuff. And I think if you don't define that for yourself, you're going to be just sort of at the mercy of the winds. And you have to have that grounding if you want to do something big and important. When we talk about big success, I think.
Yeah. You're on the Big Success Podcast. I'm Brad Sugars. We'll be back. Dr. Brian is going to take us into the answer intelligence, and then we're going to get into scaling up. We'll be back in a second.
Join Brad Sugars' Landlord event and you will quickly see why real estate investing has long been the backbone of serious long-term wealth for so many. That said, so many try and fail at creating wealth because they simply don't learn how. Visit bradsugars.com and attend this program as a standalone or as part of a Brad Sugars' entrepreneurial university.
And we're back here on the Big Success Podcast. And Dr. Brian, now I would say your full name, but it's just Dr. Brian G, because that's so much easier than doing it. Way back when, you started the whole answer intelligence stuff by looking at the 6 WH or the 5 and the how type thing. How did that become research, and teach us what actually came out of that?
Yeah. So before I did research on answers, I did research on questions, and sort of extending sort of familiar ground for those that are listening. Going back to grade school, we learn about, the 6 WH questions: why, what, how, when, where, who. We learned about open and closed questions, and that was great. But one thing hit me, that we do not know as much about answers. Like if I said, how many answer types are there? You have no idea. So I wanted to research answers.
Well, I now have an idea because I've read the book.
Yeah. But those that haven't read the book, and I really wanted to understand communication in a very basic form, questions and answers, and how I could navigate those conversations, and then through the research, how others could navigate conversations effectively.
Yeah. So what's the big lesson out of that from those questions and answers? Because then you go into your 6 answer archetypes. Let's focus on that for a little bit.
Yeah, maybe, to go to the big takeaway, and then I can go into the 6 answer types. The big takeaway, I think, is, looking at the function of questions and answers. The function of questions is curiosity. The function of answers is influence. And this is something I don't think people fully appreciate. Like, we're used to sales approaches, ask great questions, but it's really the answers that give influence. For example, in sales, how do you close the deal? You answer the proverbial question that keeps the executive buyer up at night. It is the answers where the influence rests. And just to connect this to our prior conversation, then I can get into the 6 answer types. We've been using AQ the whole time here, right? This is fundamental to communication. And in this podcast, you've asked me, questions, what is success? And I, define that as a concept of this becoming whole. And I gave a metaphor of full circle learning. So you can answer a what question with concept and metaphor. Then I explained a little bit about why, being whole is important to me, and I gave you a story. So why questions, and the answer with a story or theory, which is strategy. And then also you asked me, how do you become successful? And I gave you a 3-step procedure: self-reflection, involve others, and transform. And then also actions can answer the how question. So in a basic form, what AQ is a formula mapping questions and answers, but done at the highest level, it's much more than a formula.
Yeah. Yeah. So then, all right. So let's break that down then. You've mentioned a few of them: the story, the metaphor, the procedure. So let's break down those 6 so people can help understand that.
Yeah. Let's start with what, and I'll give you an example in a different context. I'm sure many of those listening are leaders in their organizations. And so I think of asking yourself a basic question: what is leadership? So you can answer that as a concept or metaphor. So for example, I could say, leadership is inspiring others to achieve goals. Okay, that's a definition, it's a concept. Then I can say as a metaphor, leadership is 2 ropes. And for those that are just listening, I have my fingers extended. When the ropes are separate, they're strong. When the ropes are braided together, they're stronger. That's how I lead. Each meeting, I'm going to inspire and hold people accountable. So what I've just demonstrated is answering as a concept and metaphor. Why is that important? I need self-awareness if I'm going to lead others. And second, imagine, Brad, I'll put you in the position of being reporting to me. That would never happen. But, if you're reporting to me and, I'm meeting you for the first time, I may answer twice, give you both of those answers so you really understand what Brian thinks leadership is. So that's the first question. Concept and answers, concept and metaphors. Let me pause there. I don't know if you want me to go on to the why and how questions.
Yeah, let's dive into those because I think they're all very important. But
Yeah, so let's stick with leadership. So I'll make these very brief. I could explain why leadership is important. So individuals have different motivations for leadership. Imagine I'm on an interview and I explain that leadership leads to employee retention because I know the company has retention issues, right? And also, academic research shows that individuals leave supervisors, not organizations. So, and it's a tight labor market. So I make that clear explicitly. I say, I'm here to be a leader for you because leadership leads to employee retention. So that's a theory answer, cause and effect, or strategy, you might call it. And then I can give a story answer. And I won't give you a story. We all know what stories are. But now I lean in and I give my best story of how I lead people and how people have stayed with me. They love me, right? So I'm answering the why question. And just extending further, I just go to the how question. Now it's up to me to explain how I lead. So I would need to explain a procedure, maybe 3 steps how I lead a meeting, just like I talked about the 3 steps of success for me. And then I would talk about key actions that relate to my leadership. So actions, are behaviors we do, and there's 2 types. There's best practices, and then there's sort of unique actions. And I could sort of talk about something that's a best practice. Like I don't know, I could say I lead a meeting and I listen to everyone's opinion first, right? And so you get the idea. And obviously the quality of your answers matter. So the quality of my story matters, but also knowing which answers map to which questions is something paramount and happens before you actually answer.
yeah, so when we so I'll go back into my learning and my understanding of from the book and from watching you speak for us. Does it? I mean, in the beginning, it took me a lot to sit down and go, okay, this is the map. How do I actually remember this map? Like, when someone comes to me with a how question, I got to answer it this way. And it's like, it took me a while to grasp that. Is that something that eventually comes naturally to us?
Yeah, I think, first of all, it is second nature. If you're reflecting on yourself, Brad, you're an expert communicator. You're doing these things naturally. When we studied the top communicators in the world, we're studying things they did, not things we just made up they should do. And 2 responses about being natural. First of all, when you use these answers in practice and intentional, they become better. So for everyone listening, probably everyone has been on interviews, an interview season as a junior person. And if you reflect back to that experience, you do the first interview, you tell a story about yourself, it doesn't really work. The second interview, you tell a story a little bit better. The third interview, you nail it. And then for the 4th interview, 5th interview, you tell the story perfectly and you get the job because all your answers are on point. We've just demonstrated as AQ. You've intentionally used stories and repeated them and you got better. Now imagine you do the same thing for metaphors, procedures, and you're aware of what you're doing and combining your answers, you're going to be intentional. And the other thing I'll say is I sort of liken this to basketball or any sport. Take basketball. You can learn the different shots, a jump shot, a 3-pointer, hook shot, all these shots. And I would assert anybody can go on the court and, half an hour of time, you'll probably start to make free throws. Are you completely proficient? No. But anybody can learn this. Anybody can do it. It just requires intentional practice. That's it.
Yeah. So let's break it down then. Let's focus a little bit on salespeople first and foremost. Salespeople learning the formula. What's, I guess, the top 2 things they will get better at by understanding this?
Yeah, I think, I'll say 2 things. One is it's question recognition, which is part of the high IQ practices. And even though we think we know a lot about questions, we understand the questions by how they map to answers. So, for example, I've done work with sales organizations, and in AQ terms, executive buyers are asking why. Why should I work with you? Maybe they're being implicit. And what do the inexperienced sellers do? They're answering how questions with features and functions, and they're losing. So, first, question recognition. Which question is being asked? They may not use the word why, what, or how, but they're asking the why question. And so then be able to map it to the right answer. So that's step one, and that'll get you far. The second thing I recommend for someone in sales is think of your value proposition as an organization. And a simple exercise, can you communicate that value proposition in terms of 6 answers? And it's more challenging than you think. You may have a story, but can you transform that story into a metaphor, into procedures and actions? And just to be explicit, like here's an example of a story and metaphor. If those aren't, for those that aren't really familiar, we have the story of Romeo and Juliet as a metaphor that's star-crossed lovers. They're related, but they're distinct answers. So yeah, that second point is if you can challenge yourself individually as an organization to develop 6 answers, you're ready with the currency to respond when you're in those conversations.
I think one of the big things, and we'll come to this, we'll take a quick break in a second, but I think one of the big things is that I had to sit down and learn is almost to pre-plan, not role play. Yeah, we did. We role played a lot of the answers based on actually thinking about this stuff. We'll talk more about that in a moment. We're going to be back after this on the Big Success Podcast. We're going to get more into how you get better answers, better questions, but we're also going to talk about scaling up.
Dr. Brian Glibkowski is an author, researcher, and futurist passionate about the role of questions and answers in business and society. To learn more about Dr. Brian Glibkowski, please visit raiseyouraq.com.
You're back on the Big Success Podcast. I'm Brad Sugars. Dr. Brian Glibkowski. See, I got it out right there, Brian. Working with improv comedians and prep work. Tell me more about why prep work or how that works.
Yeah, I have the good fortune to work with Second City folks out of Chicago of improv fame, Saturday Night Live, ex-folks in that area. And we're talking about improv and how it relates to answer intelligence. And there's some parallels. So with improv, the way it works is there's preparation. So you do a mountain of preparation, you understand things, and there's principles that set on top of that preparation when you're live in the improv. Principles like yes and. You always go forward. It's like an improv. Oh, we're in a ballroom. The other person doesn't say, no, we're not in a ballroom. We're in a dungeon. That doesn't work. You go with the flow. Now, how that relates to AQ is you can prepare ahead of time, understand questions and answers, understand 6 answers, say, for value proposition, but then you get into the actual conversation. And the lesser of us are going to follow scripts, but what AQ is an operating framework. And there's principles of how you navigate conversation. So that's similar to the yes and. And the principles are things like, know the best answer for a given question, or answer twice to appeal to the left and right side of the brain, logical and emotional. So those that are operating at the highest level of AQ are not using scripts. They are using it as an operating framework to navigate conversations and be sort of in the conversation in real time, dynamically adjusting and changing.
Yeah. So if you're sitting down with a coach, let's example, because, that's us, that's me, how much prep work should a coach put into learning questions and studying the whole what questions lead the right way and what questions get the right answers?
Yeah, that's a big question. We have a lot of coaches we work with. The way I'll answer it is the following. I think, first of all, coaches should understand the framework, questions, and answers. So if they're asking a client, why do you want to be a leader? They're looking for a story or theory. So you want to map it. You want to know that. Second, I think it's permissible for coaches and a good idea for coaches to provide answers on occasion. And you can do it in non-biasing ways. One of our coaches that I work with told me that his goal of coaching is to accelerate things. So if he can provide an answer to someone to accelerate their process and learning, he'll do it. Because sometimes the coachee doesn't know the answer. So imagine if you provide a metaphor about what strategy is for the coachee, and all of a sudden that moves them, accelerates them to a new place. So what this means is that I think a coach not only has to understand how questions and answers map to each other, But an effective coach has experience in the real world, and they have answers they can bring to the table. And that's a value add. And I know, speaking with several action coaches, I know that's what they bring is sort of real world experiences.
Yeah. One of the interesting things, and it came up for me, not in the book, but when you were speaking, giving the answer before asking the question sort of thing, or leading their answer by giving an answer before the question. Can you teach me a bit more about that?
Yeah. So what this gets at is sort of the subtle art of this. We're so used to questions coming first, then answers, but you can reverse that. You can have an answer first in a sense. And for example, let's stick with sales since we talked about this. Imagine you start a sales meeting with a story as the seller. What does that do? It sets the context within which they ask subsequent questions.
Yeah.
So you're narrowing the scope, right? And actually, in point of fact, you're asking a question perhaps to you're providing an answer, that story, to an implicit question or even a latent question, a question they should be asking but they're not asking. So in the hands of like a masterful coach or communicator, you can provide an answer first, and that's okay.
So let's talk about scaling up. And I want to use the question and answer philosophy to talk about scaling up. What is, in your experience, what's the difference between someone who asks the little question and someone who asks the massive question, either of themselves or, some people ask, how do I get dinner tonight? And other people ask, how do I change the world? What's your experience on the difference of the people?
Yeah, I think, I think it's really a simple formula. The people that are effective heretofore at questions and answers sort of knew it intuitively. They sort of knew they wanted to ask these questions, and they were students of the world around them. So the original research we did was very interesting. We did it with the top golf instructors in the world, and it's rated by Golf Digest and Golf Magazine. And one of the golf instructors had a library of 3,500 books. Does that mean everyone listening here should have 3,500 books? No. But my point is, they were a student of golf. So what that meant was they understood the psychology of golf, the physiology of golf, the nutrition of golf, and they were all in. So I think those that, the formula is, if you want to be a better leader or salesperson, you have to understand how to navigate those conversations with yourself and others. So question and answer, the framework of AQ is important. But then it's the willingness to be a student of those answers and constantly craving more. I think that's the difference between those that really excel and those that don't. And just to punctuate this, I could see this in people I talk to. They know the answers. Like when I talk to executives, for a while, I asked them about, employee engagement in their company. And the people that had no idea about employee engagement, you know what their answers were? Things like, I don't know, people are smiling around here. They're super excited. And the people that knew, they answered in ways that are consistent with AQ. They would say things like, as a concept, maybe not exactly this, but they might say, well, I define employee engagement as those individuals that think about their job a lot. They're emotionally engaged. When we do well, they're excited. When things go bad, they're down. They're physically engaged. They have the stamina to do the job. Well, that person is a student of engagement. They're asking and answering questions about engagement. The other executives who give me the pithy answers, they're not asking the little or big questions.
Yeah. So I want to go to the quick fire round. Your theories on success on 5 different areas. Okay. Quick question, quick answer. What is Brian's theory on how do you succeed at self-development?
So I think self-development is taking your biggest gap and making it your biggest strength.
How do you succeed at goal setting and goal achieving, by the way?
Yeah. At goal setting, I think it's simply identifying, if you want to do a big success, what's the big outcome, the big hairy goal, and then simply identifying procedures and breaking it down into small steps to achieve it.
I love that. What's your theory on success about enjoying life?
I think enjoying life is being present in the moment. And for me, it's about, not being as cerebral and just being involved. Everyone has to, enjoy.
How do you succeed at health?
I think health is a combination of mind, body, and soul. And you need to nourish all three of those to be healthy.
Love it. And final one on that, how do you succeed at relationships?
I think with relationships, it's about seeing others and looking for interdependence in ways that you can integrate with them. And that answer, by the way, relates to my research on negotiations and how you become an effective negotiator and provide value for others. You want to be integrated. You want to be a whole with someone else.
Brilliant. Love it. Final question. What is the best advice or the best quote you ever got on success?
I think, and this relates to my theme about becoming whole, I like the quote by Jiddu Krishnamurti. He's a Indian author and spiritual guru. He says, when you step into water, you never step into the same water twice. It's never the same. And I think that's true as we think about success. For me, I had my initial journey of trying to become a better professor, whatever it might be. But as my journey continued, I was stepping into new water each time, and it was the same journey, but it was constantly changing, and you have to understand that and go with that.
Love it. Brilliant. This is the Big Success Podcast. Answer Intelligence. Make sure you hit all the show notes, follow Brian, learn from Brian, do everything you can to get great at questions and answers. We'll be back next week with more of your success. And that's the Big Success Podcast for today. Hopefully you took a lot of notes, and hopefully you learned a bunch, and hopefully you're going to take action on it and refer people. Remember, if you haven't subscribed, click that subscribe button now. Be with us every week on the Big Success Podcast. BS, Brad Sugar's Big Success. Take action. Check the show notes for all the links. I'll give you all the links for everything that your speaker had. Make sure you follow through and keep the learning going. Remember, you got to grow into your goals. I'll speak to you next time on the Big Success Podcast.
You've been listening to the Big Success Podcast with the #1 business coach in the world, Brad Sugars. To learn more about how to achieve business and personal success, as well as how to level up or listen to past episodes, visit www.bradsugars.com.